This process is called segmented ring construction. First, boards are cut into strips. Then the strips are cut into segments. There will be 8 segments to each circle. The angle of each cut is exactly 22 1/2 degrees. The length of each segment is determined by the intended diameter of the circle to be made. The width of the strip is determined by how much wood needs to be left after it's turned. The next step is to glue the segments together in pairs. The glass work surface enables me to make smooth, level joints. Rubbing the glued ends together seems to create a suction-like effect that makes clamps unnecessary. When the glue has set up on the pairs, it's time to glue the pairs together into semicircles, using exactly the same process. The next step is to glue the semicircles together to make rings. However, if there was any error at all in the initial cuts, the joints will not be perfectly flush where the semicircles meet. So the error must be corrected before the final joints can be made. With shorter semicircles, this is done quickly and easily on a disc sander. The 2 semicircles are glued as close together as though they were making a circle to a board, but they are separated from the board by a layer of paper so they can easily be detached. The semicircles are held together by a band clamp. And the pieces are clamped to the board until the glue dries. Once the glue has dried and the joints are set, it's ready for the next step, and that is to very carefully make a straight cut through the joint, dressing both sides of the surfaces involved. With a little luck, the gap is less than the kerf or width of the blade, which is 1/16 of an inch, and the process is completed with one single cut. Now the dressed semicircles are ready to be glued into a complete circle, held securely by a band clamp and set aside until the glue is set. Next, I need to make a special jig that will hold the rings in place on the lathe while I turn them. For that, I use a piece of 3/4 inch particle board cut into a 15-inch square. Next, I find the center of the board and scribe a circle the exact size of a faceplate that will screw onto the headstock of the lathe. Finally, I attach the faceplate to the board. I now have a jig ready to go to work with. The wood used to make these rings is between 4 and 5/4 thick. Next step is to rip them in half on the table saw, getting 2 rings from each about a 1/2 inch thick. Next come several passes through a drum sander to get both sides smooth and parallel to each other. End-grained glue joints have very little strength. To create the needed strength, these thinner rings are glued together with their joints overlapping. Depending on their thickness, it takes 3 or 4 of them in order to have 1.5 inches of thickness. These rings, now laminated into one piece, will be glued to one of the faceplates, separated by paper for easy separation. Once the glue has set, it's ready to put on the lathe and begin turning. This part takes the least amount of time, but it's most rewarding because you begin to see what the finished product will look like. This process continues, stopping from time to time to check measurements until the turning is done and the finished product is ready to remove from the faceplate. Since the faceplate and the ring are glued with paper in between, they are very easy to separate. The paper simply comes apart. And now we go back to the drum sander to get the paper off, both sides nice and smooth, and be sure that both sides are parallel. The finish sanding will be done by hand. Holes will be drilled for the bolts, and Danish oil will be applied for a natural, rich finish.